Hey Creo, welcome back to Cruise. I'm so excited to see you guys back in your cruise this week, and I hope you had an awesome time and experience last night. I sure did. It was fantastic playing in the worship team as well as playing the game. If you don't know what I'm talking about regarding the game, you got to check out the highlight video that should be out sometime this week, so keep an eye out in our YouTube channel for it. You know what? Why don't you hit that little notification bell? It'll let you know exactly when we do our videos. Most of them sometimes come out on Wednesdays, but if you have the little bell on, you'll know exactly when that video, and you'll be able to be the first ones to watch it before our crew nights. Before we can launch into learning and understanding how God calls us to be holy, we need to understand what holiness is. So instead of me doing it, we're going to actually get the guys from the Bible Project, a YouTube channel here in YouTube, to explain that to us. They do a fantastic job. You got to check out their videos. They're the Bible Project. We're going to put a link down below in our description, so make sure you check them out, give them a like, give them a follow. They're amazing at explaining really complex themes in the scriptures and making awesome videos every single week. So you got to check them out. So without further ado, here's the Bible Project guys explaining everything to do with holiness.
You've probably heard the word holy before, or at least sang it in a church song once or twice. And for most people, this idea is really just connected to being a morally good person. So God is holy because he's morally perfect.
Yeah, that is part of it. But in the Bible, the idea of holiness is even bigger and more rich. What it's really describing is how God is the creative force behind the whole universe. He's the one and only being with the power to make a world full of such beauty and life. And so all these abilities, they make God utterly unique, which is the meaning of the word holy. So a helpful way to think about God's holiness is by using the sun as a metaphor. The sun is unique, at least within our solar system, and it's really powerful. It's the source of all this beautiful life on our planet. And so you could say that the sun is holy. And you can actually take this metaphor even further in that the whole area around the sun is also holy.
Yeah, because the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets.
Yeah, exactly. So that very power and goodness that generates all this life is also dangerous. I mean, the sun, if you get too close, will annihilate you. And in the same way, there's this paradox at the heart of God's own holiness, because if you're impure, his presence is dangerous to you. And not because it's bad, but because it's so good. And so the first time we see this paradox of God's holiness, it's in the story of Moses and the burning bush.
So God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And Moses covers his face in fear, and God says, hey, don't come any closer. It's intense.
It's actually that intensity of God's holiness that's explored even more in the stories about Israel's temple, which was the main place where God's holy presence was located. And at the center of the temple was this room called the Most Holy Place, this the hot spot of God's presence. And whether you're an Israelite living in the land around the temple or a priest working right in the temple, you're in proximity to God's holy presence, which is dangerous.
Yeah, this is a problem. So how's it supposed to work?
Well, in the Bible, the solution is that you need to become pure.
So like being morally pure.
Yeah, and that's easy enough to understand. But the Bible spends a lot of time talking about another kind of purity, being ritually pure, which is a state where you separate yourself from anything related to death, like touching things like diseased skin or dead bodies or even certain bodily fluids. All these make you impure. And becoming ritually impure isn't necessarily sinful. What's wrong is waltzing into God's presence when you're in an impure state. And so that's why God gave the Israelites very clear instructions for knowing when they were impure, steps to become pure, so that they could go into the temple again.
So that's what the book of Leviticus is about.
Right. But it doesn't stop there. This idea keeps developing. So later in the scriptures, we find this really interesting story by a prophet named Isaiah. And he has this crazy vision where he's in the temple and he's right in God's presence. He's totally terrified.
Yeah, he knows the rules. He shouldn't even be in there. And he's worried about being destroyed.
And then this crazy creature called a seraphim.
Yeah, that is a crazy creature.
Totally. So it flies over with a hot coal, and then it sears Isaiah's lips with the coal and says something really weird. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for.
So this burning coal somehow makes Isaiah pure.
Yeah, it's remarkable because normally if you touch something impure, it transfers its impurity to you. But now here's this new idea where you have this coal, this very holy and pure object, and it touches Isaiah, and it transfers its purity to him. Isaiah is not destroyed by God's holiness. He's transformed by it. I mean, the implications of this are just huge. But there's one more development, this time from another prophet, Ezekiel. And he has this vision where he's standing at the temple and he sees water trickling out from it. And then that water turns into a stream, and then it grows into a deep river that starts flowing through the desert, leaving this trail of green trees behind it. And then it flows into the Dead Sea, making everything fresh and alive.
So instead of becoming pure first and then going into the temple, here God's holiness comes out from the temple, making things pure and bringing them to life. What does it all mean?
So we don't know until we meet this man, Jesus. And he claims that he's fulfilling all of these ancient visions, but in surprising new ways. So Jesus, he went around touching people who are impure, people with skin diseases, a woman with chronic bleeding, or dead people. And when he touches them, their impurity should transfer over to Jesus, but instead, Jesus' purity transfers to them and actually heals their bodies.
Jesus is like that holy coal in Isaiah's vision.
Right. And Jesus claimed that he was the human embodiment of God's own holiness, and that he and his followers were now God's temple, so that through them, God's holy presence would go out into the world and bring life and healing and hope. And so this is why Jesus described his followers as having streams of living water flowing out of them.
So this is our part of the story where we find ourselves now, but where's this all heading?
So the last pages of the Bible end with a final vision about God's holiness. And this time it's by a guy named John. And in his vision, we see the whole world made completely new. The entire earth has become God's temple. And Ezekiel's river is there, flowing out of God's presence, immersing all of creation, removing all impurity, and bringing everything back to life.
Wasn't that a fantastic video? We're going to put the link down below. You got to check out more of the Bible Project stuff online on YouTube or even on their website. You got to check it out because they do some amazing videos and they explain very complex themes in a very entertaining way, but in not an over the head kind of way. It's really, really cool. So you got to check out more of their videos. So make sure you like and subscribe to the videos if you get a chance. This week's devotional talks about us being set apart and not separate. Now that you understand what holiness means, we need to kind of take a look at what it means for us. Set apart means that we are actually reserved by God to do something important. That does not mean that we cut ourselves off. That's what separate means, to be completely separated from other people. It means that we would only hang out with people who are like us, like Christians, in a church. That's what being separate means. You know that the church did this for a long time. We separated ourselves from the world, and we actually are suffering a little bit of the reason and the effects of us separating ourselves from the world for a very long time. This was something called the monastic period that happened probably during the Dark Ages. That's what happened. When we got to close ourselves off from the world, the Dark Ages happened. That's how bad it got. All right. We don't want that to happen again. If you don't know what the Dark Ages is, that's the time when knights and swords and big battles and dudes and horses with shiny armor, that's what the Dark Ages happened. Now it sounds kind of cool, but it was really, really bad. It was really, really bad. Lots of wars, lots of diseases, lots of problems, and simply because the church cut themselves off. We decided that we didn't want to be tainted by unholiness, and we decided to cut ourselves off from the world and create monasteries and places of worship in very remote areas so that people didn't come in contact with unholiness or unholy people. Now this was a problem, and this is a big problem because it still kind of happens to us in Christian circles. We tend to only hang out with people that are Christians, that have the same opinion that we do. Now God does not want us to be only congregating or meeting with people that are of the same like-mindedness. He wanted us to actually have more of an impact in the world. He wanted us to be influencers of the world. How? Through our holiness. See, He gives us holiness so that we will influence the world. And we're going to take a look at that next week. But He wanted us to be influencers, so people see something different about us. Holiness causes you to be different, not the same as everybody else. In your tiniest little actions, people can see that you are different. And that's what God wanted to happen, for people to notice your holiness so that they will be wondering why you're doing these things and why you're different than everybody else. it's too easy to pretend to be like everyone else, guys. It's too easy to be part of the crowd. Imagine if we did not have any difference between us and anybody else. Why would there be any point to being part of the church? Why would we come here? There's plenty of other clubs and groups of people that basically gather just like we do, but there's more to this. It's about God making us holy. It's about Him changing our hearts. It's about making us different, act different, even look different. Amazingly enough, in scriptures, Moses was the guy that actually was one of the first guys who actually got to see God face to face. And it says in scripture that when he went to meet with God, he went and was surrounded by God's holiness in the highest of places that he could be with God, any human has ever been with God. And they said that whenever he came down from the mountain, his face glowed with the holiness of God, that people were freaked out. They actually saw the difference that God made in just being in God's presence made in Moses physically. God wanted us not to be out there shining like, glowing like lamps, but He did want our hearts and our actions to shine like lights in this world so that people who need God's holiness will ever see it. So that's it for me today, this week, guys. I hope that you have an awesome week, an awesome time of discussion in your cruise. Remember to bring your devotionals because you're going to need the questions that are in there. Make sure that you take a look at them at home and that you try to wrestle with some of the questions. I know that they're not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to make you stronger and make you ask a lot of really good questions. So we'll see you next week. Bye.